Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of GM Tips. This is GM Rick, and I wanted to get some time to talk about Golarion, the Inner Sea. Now, I know I've mentioned a little bit about it in the past, and I really got to say, I'm going to do a dive, but I'm not going to do a dive like Mark Mooreland, Ryan Costello, and Anthony Lee did on No Direction 95, which, by the way, if you want a deep dive and some great information, Mark Moreland is definitely the expert on all things Golarion, and I'll say all things Golarion. Uh, there's more specific ones that have great knowledge on certain areas of the world. For instance, Wes Schneider knows a ton when it comes to Ustalav and some of the more gothic areas and mysterious aeonic areas, the strange aeons, as they say, in that new path, and some of the things that he did on the Carrying Crown. And of course, James Jacobs and some others know specifics on certain areas. However, Mark Moreland, definitely the expert in my watching of his YouTube cast. And great job, by the way, guys. I am not trying to take anything away from that. That's much deeper dive than probably what I will go. But I wanted to kind of go through a little bit, and I'm going to be using three different Pathfinder products. Number one, the Inner Sea Gods. I'm going to use the Inner Sea World Guide, which you won't see in here, but you can see it pretty well. I'll take my cover off. As you can tell, I'd like to protect my books, and you put the investment in, you want to protect the book. That's for sure. So this is the Inner Sea World Guide, and I will be using heavily from that in the timeline to go through what the world is about. And then the Inner Sea races. We'll talk a little bit about those and some of the different races of the world. But let's talk a little bit about Golarion as a world. Golarion is an interesting setting, and some people love the setting, some people don't, by the way. What I love about it is that there's a lot of history, and they've done two books on it. There was an Inner Sea Gazetteer setting that was early on that was a $29 buy from Paizo. Again, nice dive in. It was a good start, but it really took form after this book got written, and James Jacob headed it up. But I bet if I look in here, I bet I will find Mr. Mooreland somewhere in the deal on it. I won't doubt it. But this one came out later on in the setting, and it became a hardcover versus a soft cover. And as you can see, there's a lot of information that they have on the world setting itself. But I think in order to understand the flavoring of Golarion, you have to go a little bit into the history, and I'm going to start there first. And there's a great timeline that is in the books that they go through on page, I believe it is 33, which is just in chapter 2 of the Inner Sea. Yeah, there it is. And they go through the history. Now, Golarion is a very rich world of tragedy, sorrow, and loss. And I've heard some people say it's a darker setting than Faerun is in 3.5. And it's more almost in the Greyhawk-esque type of setting. And it really is. It's a world that started out in the Age of Creation. And in the Age of Creation, there were several races that were contesting for the beginning of the world. And these worlds, the creation is basically a debate on what made the world. Some think there were vault builders. Some think the aboleths had a hand in it. Some people think there are otherworldly influences that came about. But Golarion's Age of Creation is probably the most left open by any of the material that's out there. So what it does is it allows you as a GM to really kind of write your own beginning of how it all began. And that's the one thing I do love about the Paizo authors. They do give a lot of structure to the world, but they leave you a lot of creativity as a GM. It is not by any means draconian in the history setting. It has its events, it has the things, but there's a lot of open space of what you can fill in. And some of the material on the different countries, now you'll find in the campaign settings, they come out with more information for the different countries. So keep that in mind. I'm doing this simply from the Inner Sea World Guide. There is so much more information packed into those individual ones that they do in the countries. And they've done a lot. They've done some on Andoran, Varisia, Ustalav with the Rule of Fear. They've done some on Cheliax, the Infernal Empire. They've had a lot of material that has come out on the different areas. Osirian, the land of the pharaohs, and they've had so many different areas that they've talked about and really expanded. And there's a lot more to go. And I think as the adventure paths come, you will see more and more areas defined. That's typically what they do when they write these things. Now let's hit the Age of the Serpents. The Age of the Serpents, and again, they don't put dates. So this world, as far as we know, has a dated history from negative 5293. That's when there was a significant event that changed the world, and we'll hit that here in a minute. But the Age of Serpents, that's when the serpent folks were beginning to rise. The Aslanti humans had already begun their rise, and they came up after Rovagug, the world destroyer god, was entrapped by Asmodeus, Saren Ray, and several unders into the far Casmaron world part of it. And Casmaron hasn't been really defined a lot. It's one of the many continents, and that's one thing you'll find about the Inner Seas. There are a bunch of continents that they will talk about. And so we'll hit those slightly in this. We're not going to go into a lot on that. I want to hit more of the populated and known areas, but there's a lot. There's Arcadia, there is Casmaron, there is Tientia, if I pronounced it correctly, the Tiens. And there is Aveston, which is the northern continent on the Inner Sea. And there is Garand, which is the southern continent. And then there are several other continents that I haven't mentioned yet. And let me kind of hit on those a little bit. There is Serusan. Serusan is beyond the trackless sea in what's called the Valashami Peninsula. And it's got its own little continent out there. And let me see, is there any others I'm missing? I don't think so. Casmaron has the Padishah Empire. Aslan, that's right. The Aslanti had their own continent. And we'll go into that a little more in the timeline. But during the rise of the Aslanti Empire, over near Garand, the Serpent Empire began its rise to rival. Now, mind you, there are some other empires that aren't thrown in there. There is Golgon, the Cyclopean. And that would be Mini GM, knocking over all her things. Gotta love her. Just cleaned up a mess and she knocks it all over again. So again, you've got several different empires that are rising up. You've got the Serpents, the Aslanti humans, which are a very advanced race of humans. You have the Aboleth, which are on the floor of the sea floors, plus some of the other races that are enslaved to them that are down there, like the aquatic elves. You have the elves that have come from another planet. And you have also the dwarves, which are in the Underdark realms that have come up under their own god. And then you have the gnomes, which haven't yet made an appearance. There's the first world, which is the Fey world, as I call it, or the primordial world. And they haven't yet done their crossing over yet to this world. And then you have the halflings, which rise up kind of with the humans. And then finally, you have the Cyclopeans that are making their rise with some of the giants. There are other races that are primitive, but these are the main key empires that are rising during this time. Now, the Age of Legend comes about, and basically that is arguably the greatest time for humanity on the world and the humanity's civilizations. And basically, the continent that was most powerful was the Aslanti continent, and from there, you know, they branched out, and there was Thassalon, who was the ruler that basically colonized what became the Thessalonian Empire in what is now Varissia. And then there were the Ruin Lords that came with him, which were Rune, R-U-N-E, not Ruin, but Rune Lords. And they came over and did some colonization. Now, the Atlantes were known to go out and colonize and help different areas. They had some slight colonies in Garand and some other places where they'd set up trade, Casmaron. So there was some things going on in that world. And the Casmaron human empire was rising with the Kelishites and the Vudrani, who are coming up in their own right. And of course, the Asians over in Tianxia, who are coming up on their own right. What happened is that the Aslanti reached a serious power. Now, at the time, they grew very proud. They got into flesh warping. They got into a lot of other practices that were focused into areas of magic and into technology. And they were starting to rise at a real high rate and level. Now, where history contests of this world, the Aboleths supposedly had their fingers in every empire. They did it through what was called the Veiled Masters. The Veiled Masters are a term you're going to hear used a lot that are very unexplained. There's been some explanation through the books. The Occult Handbook or the Occult Mysteries is a real good one that talks a little bit about the Veiled Masters. The Veiled Masters are a group of Aboleth who supposedly would take over the minds and live through the flesh of whatever creature whose mind they destroyed. And they became puppets of that particular Aboleth. So supposedly they were influencing different empires, and that there were games being played even among the Aboleth in the different empires. Again, no hard proof on this, but there's a lot of alluding to that throughout the history of Golarion, but in the beginnings especially. And what happened was the Aslanti started to, in the Aboleth's mind, grow too powerful. So what happened is in these times, now there are human empires other than the Aslanti. There's the Shori Empire, which is in Garand. The Shori were known to make the flying cloud cities, and they started rising up as well. And there was the area that was Lyrgan, and the Lyrgeni Empire, which was a prophetic empire, somewhat like the Cyclopses, where they had oracles and prophecy. And everybody saw this event coming that were in the oracle realms. And this is the event in negative 5293. And this was the Age of Darkness. Now, during the Age of Darkness, the Aboleth brought the Starstone down, which was a huge meteorite, and crashed it into the continent right near where Absalom, the city of Absalom, the center of human civilization, would rise up. This event basically just put an end to the growth of the human empires. And, you know, the event's described as follows. It says, Earthfall. The Starstone tumbles into Golarion, creating the inner sea and kicking off 1,000 years of darkness. And they even show the event. That's how significant that event is. And you can see it. And right here, this is Garand, this is Aveston. So this is where there used to be a land bridge between the two. That's where this came crashing down. Now, Aslant and Thassalon are utterly destroyed, sent under the ocean. And I believe that's why the event was made to happen, was to get rid of the Aslanti, because they were seen as the dominant human race at the time. And the Aboleth did not want that. So, keep that in mind. Now, the elves depart Golarion through the Sovirian stone. Sorry, I'm killing it, guys. My pronunciations. Unfortunately, my pronunciation is not as good as my knowledge of this. and so most of them departed to one of the planets within the solar system. However, there were others. Some stayed behind. Some of the elves went into the Underdark to become the Drow, and they became the dominant force down there with Duergar, the Dark Dwarves, as well as the jungles of Garant, where they became the Akuje and the Elige. And so there was some migrations into different areas, but they didn't all leave, but a good amount of them did. And so, you know, it was a horrific time. Basically, in that time, almost to the date, about 160 years later, King Targic founds the kingdom of Targadeth, uniting the dwarves and bringing them up. They wanted to abandon the subterranean tunnels and come to the surface. And that was a huge deal. If you think about that, that's not a small move. And they had to go chase the orcs out above them because the orcs were on the, sorry, getting myself some power, on the layers above them. So the dwarves and their fleeing of the first level, what would become I believe Narvoth, is where they push up. They left some of their tribes behind, which would become the Duergar. Some of the tribes went up, and they built the dwarven citadels that would come up in the dwarven kingdoms and in other places around the world. The orcs emerge onto the surface at first in negative 5102 AR. So basically that, and AR stands for Erodin, the death of Erodin, which will come later. But basically they're pushing up because the dwarves are chasing through there to get, they want to destroy the orcs. And so the orcs flee themselves and they go into the surface world. Now the dwarves fulfilled their quest for the sky and got their sky citadels. But that will be the downfall of a few of them later. Now comes the Age of Anguish, because now you've had the Age of Darkness. Now mankind has to resurface and rebuild from the ashes of what the Aboleth have done. And the Age of Anguish closes out the Age of Darkness, and humanity begins to re-civilize again and build civilization. The gnome race comes about in negative 4202 AR. They are fleeing something in terror from the first world. It is never defined as what, but they flee it. There's a lot of speculation. And again, the occult mysteries talks a little bit about what some of the theories are, but no one has said a firm theory of why. And in the first world, mind you, the gnomes are immortal. They don't die unless they are killed. So they're fairly immortal. They are that to a certain extent on the human world, except in this world, they are subjected to a disease called the bleaching. And this is a neat little twist because it's not your gnome on every other world. The bleaching basically says if the gnomes quit having their desire for life and their lust for life and they settle down and start to go into a routine, the bleaching begins to affect them. It's like the everyday doldrums of repetition with no new exploration kills the gnomes and limits their life. And the bleaching becomes their death if they're not careful. Now, it is somewhat reversible. But mind you, they've come from an area where they were infinitely chaotic and capricious, and they are. They are viciously capricious at times in their jokes. And humans don't understand that, as do other races. So the gnomes in this world are very vibrant. That's why they have the different colored hair, the spikes, and all the other things that they do. They want to be different. They don't settle into an area for very long unless there's a lot to be explored in that area. Otherwise, they move on. They're constantly moving. And so you will see that in most of their cities and even settlements, they're not permanent. And if they are permanent, there's a reason. There's a lot going on there that keeps them from bleaching. And that's their big thing. The Jiska Imperium forms itself on Garion. What is now Rahadum and Thuvia is and even down a little bit into Lyrgin and that area. That's where the Jiska Imperium comes into play. They are a very prominent imperium of people that comes into play and really begins to rise the order of humanity. They're very mathematical, very logical, and very law-oriented. And yet, there was a lot that happened. They didn't last forever. But those were one of the imperiums that were founded. The Pit of Gormuz opens in central Kazmaron, disgorging the spawn of Rovagug. The Pit of Gormuz was it's over where Rovagug the Destroyer, and he's the world-ending god, is captured by the other gods. He's put there. With that opening, his spawn come up. So the Terraskew and many of these other nasty, nasty monsters come up. And they're very near immortal creatures. So that's why in this world, the Terraskew is not something easy to kill. Then comes the time of Belkazin, the orc, sieging the dwarven sky citadel of Koldakor. And basically, after a time, he takes it, just basically murdering the dwarves. And they take their first sky citadel, and soon the realm of Belkazin is settled. Now, it doesn't come for a while, but this is in like negative 3708. And then in negative 3502 to show you that basically Garand and the Mwangi wasn't this backwards area. The old mage Jatembe was a real mythical figure and a very powerful mage out of that time. Some speculate he was Shori Empire, some speculate he's polyglot. But either way, he and the Magic 10 warriors bring the light of learning back to the world to overcome fear and despair in the deep in the Mwangi expanse, to turn it back into an enlightened area and not so evil. And basically his discoveries will inspire those flying cities of the Shori Empire that I talk about. The Shori Empire goes back for a while, but Jatembe leads them into that age of magical discovery for the flying cities. Similar to Faerun and the what is it? The mythal stones that keep the cities up. Kind of this world's version of that. Now, the Age of Destiny comes next. And the Age of Destiny, why is it that? Because Osirian and the empire, what would be their Egyptian empire, comes to being. And basically, the god Nethys comes and raises up the first ruler of Osirian and the god kings. And so becomes the time of the different pharaohs. And the desert nomads at that time, also in the area of the Jitska Empire around Thuvia and what is Western Osirian, it's not that far out yet. They don't have all that land. Formed the Tikritchian League. And the Tikritchian League were these nomadic peoples that banded together to form a nation of their own. And after time, these pharaohs basically absorbed the Tikritchian League, and with the collapse of the Jitska Imperium in negative 2764, take over that area. Now, about negative 23, the Shori Aeromancers, working on the 1,000-year-old traditions begun by old mage Jatembe, established the first of the flying cities, which is Ko. And they're able to go up, and they establish several other ones. So these cities go up, and they're literally flying around the world. It's amazing what happens. So yes, there is a darkness to this world, but there's so much rich history of technology. And I'm looking at my mini GM. Hang on a second. All right, so let me show you a map, and this is out of the Lost Kingdoms. I know. One of the biggest gripes that people have is all the material that Paizo publishes. Why do they do that? Because they don't leave you hanging on just thoughts of these empires. So take a look. There's your Thassalon Empire, and it gives the ages. There is your Sarkoris, which is another empire. There is Jitska, the Jitska Imperium that I talked about. There's ancient Osirian, and when it rose up. And then there's Golgon. So these are all the lost kingdoms. If you want more detail outside of what the timeline gives you, this goes into the details. So keep that in mind. There's lots of material out there that you can get to research these. Why are these important? Because if you want to be treasure hunter and you want to go send your party finding the lost treasures like Indiana Jones, this is the type of empires that you need to know about. This is what founded this world. And again, basically the Tikritchian League and the four pharaohs have a joined forces. They break them and absorb them. The four pharaohs bring the Tikritchian League underneath them. And that's what makes the old empire of Osirian, which was quite large in size. Now, eventually, Taldor was founded in the northern area of Aveston. And I'll show you where Taldor lies. Now, Taldor plays a huge part in the colonization of this world. And again, let's see. Can I turn it right? All right. So look up there and you'll see Taldor to the right of the screen by Andoran. Taldor used to be very large. In fact, it encompassed what is Taldor, Andoran, Issagar, Malthun, and didn't quite get Nidal. But that's where it went out from. Now, what was on Aveston at that time? There were 3 races of key note. There were the Kelid tribes. The Kelids are a bunch of different tribes that they just named for that whole area. So there were many, many Kelid tribes up in the north. There were also the dwarves who were out in their sky citadels. There were the elves that were in what is now Keonan. And there was also the Varishian nomadic people and the Shonti, the Quaz, or the different totem tribe barbarians that were up near Varissia. They all existed in this realm. Taldor was colonized, and the colonization began by the Aslantes, what was left of the Aslanti refugees. It was the last empire of the Aslan that went out. And this was in the age of Destiny, and this was in the time frame, let's see, it says in negative 1281. So not quite into the positive. Why? Because Erodin was part of those refugees. And they founded the area and later on found the Starstone, which basically would turn men into gods, but it was very difficult to do. And then about negative 892, down in among the Osirian tribes, Geb and Nex were 2 wizards that had basically colonized a part of Garen, which will become Nex and Geb, named after them. Boy, that was original. The 2 had difference in philosophy. Geb was a necromancer, and his people believed that necromancy were the way to live forever. Nex didn't believe that. Nex believed that you had to use powerful magics, transformations, conjurations. So the 2 went to war. This war would later poison a portion of the land in Garand and turn it into the Mana Waste. And in the Mana Waste is where technology would begin to thrive. Your firearms, your flintlocks, your cannons, your a lot of your clockworks, a lot of your steampunkish type of things, your airships, they're all going to come out of this area that is poisoned between these 2 mages. And the 2 go to battle to the point to where Geb does die, and he becomes an undead. And so, you know, he is driven there by Nex, and Nex founds what is going to be called the Arc Lords to protect Nex and Quantium, the capital of Nex, from Geb. Now comes the battle with the Terraskew, and it destroys the city of Nim Shaber and basically goes to Aveston, and it is basically driven to a cave in Aveston by the Aslanti and the Kelishites to keep it there. It is a nasty spawn of Rovagug, and it is immortal. Basically, because of its regenerative qualities, it does not die, and it's a very nasty creature. So a lot more deadly than in D&D 5e. Okay, so now you go to the conquering of Kadira by the Kelishites, and that takes place in negative 43 AR, and they make it into a colony. Basically, they were tribal nomads in that area. The Kelishites come in and made it part of the Padishah Imperium out of Kazmaron. So that becomes the farthest trade post. Now, eventually, Osirian is also made into a satellite government under the Kelishite Empire. Then comes the Age of Enthronement, which is from 1 AR all the way to 4606 or 4605 AR. What happens in this time? Lots of things. Lots. A lot of countries get colonized in Aveston and in Garand. There's a rise and fall. Now, Mind you, from Starfall, one thing I did not mention is the Eye of Abendigo. The Eye of Abendigo forms after Starfall. That is a constant hurricane that put Larigan and its sister empire underwater to become the Sodden Lands. And so there's so much knowledge lost from that apocalyptic event. But it puts a permanent hurricane above the Isle of Shackles, where the free captains will be and the pirates. And it divides the shipping and makes it very dangerous in that area between east and west Garant, and even the north in Aveston. What also happens? Taldor begins its crusades, its shining crusades, and it reaches out to colonize the world, the continent of Aveston, to try to stop the Lich Lord that comes up in Ustalav and tries to conquer the world, Tar-Baphon. It tries to stop the ape demon king down in the Mwangi Expanse and loses there. And then it tries to stop the death of the world wound that comes in Sarkoris. Remember, Sarkoris was an ancient empire. They get to fiddling around like they shouldn't and open a rift in their capital city to the abyss. And from it, a demon lord brings his conquesting armies little by little. And they're still working to widen the world wound and to conquest what is Aveston and turn it into the abyss. So keep that in mind. Part of it's done. The Empire of Sarkoris is no longer. It is now called the World Wound, and it is very demonic. There are some things from the Shining Crusade up there that try to fight them off. The country of Mendev is devoted to helping the troops to continue to repopulate up there and continue to fight the World Wound. Last Wall is put into place. Last Wall defends against, not only they defend in the east to protect the east from this plague from going that way, but they also fight some of the orcs and other creatures that are in the area. So a lot happens. A lot of countries come into being. In this time frame, the countries that come into being that are of significance on this world are in Aveston the countries of Erysian, which was part of the land of the Lenoran kings. That's your Ulfins or your Vikings. They've been around a long time. In fact, they made their way all over to the continent of Arcadia, where it's quote-unquote Native America, to put their little last rest for their kings over there. But in doing that, there was a realm, there was a thaindom under them that gets conquered by Baba Yaga. And this becomes Erysian, the land of eternal winter. So keep that in mind. The realm of the Mammoth Lords, that's where the last of, well, not the last of the Kellid tribes, but there and Numeria are pretty much the last bastions of the Kellid tribes. And so that's where they still are able to do it. The World Wound were Kellid tribes, but this is now a demonic realm. Mendev, of course, walls them off on the east, and Ustalav and Last Wall to the south. The river kingdoms come up. These are a bunch of little cities and kingdoms that are by petty lords that are chased out of Galt in the bloody revolts in Galt. They go up there and make their own little fiefdoms and kingdoms out of those areas. Ramzaran, the false god, comes up. So he's the human god that's the man god. He has a cult, and he founds what is Ramzaran. Keonan gets attacked by a demon called Tree Raiser, and he is bent on perverting the whole area to a pestilent forest that is of funguses and everything else. The elves and the half-elves fight him off, and the elves return, and they continue to work with the half-elves to keep him at bay with the Winter Council. And the Winter Council used to be the council that the Queen listened to, but now they're kind of a little bit at odds with the current queen. You have Druma. Druma is the lord, the traders, and they also have their own little cult down there that believes the more you gain in life, the more the wealth you have, the better off you are. And so that's under one of the many religions there. And again, like I say, I'm not doing a whole deep dive. I'm kind of giving you a snapshot of the north and the south. Isagur comes up. Isagur is a satellite country as is Malthun. Now, what happens? The Taldoran Empire spreads all through these provinces and these areas. But over time, like any empire, it decays from the inside out. And after so many crusades and expending their resources under the current ruler Stavian, they break off. Cheliax becomes its own empire, first under the god of Erodin and worshipping Erodin. But when Erodin dies, and yes, the god dies, the Aslanti god dies, and he is killed, which just brings about so much of a downfall of so many nations. The Chelish are fighting to keep their identity, and they turn to infighting between them. Well, the one that comes out is Abrogail. Abrogail. No, Abrogail. Yeah, Abrogail. I'm going to mess up names. Sorry, Paizo. Trying. Abrogail. She basically aligns the country under Asmodeus and under him and his laws, his tyrannical laws. So they become the nation of fiends. And yes, there are still those that worship the dead god Erodin and those who wish for times to come. But between the Hell Knights wanting to return order to the world and them wanting to help establish law and order of the land, so the Chelish Empire becomes to make its mark on things. And they become expansionistic. They become a very expansionistic, slave-oriented, law-oriented, tyrannical empire. They align with Nidal. Nidal, again, are also Kelid tribes, but they go under the Chitin Lord. There was a god that was a brother to Shelyn, goddess of beauty. He goes out on his own little quest, goes out to the Cthulhu side of things, and comes back a chitin. And he's about self-flagellation and piercing of the flesh and the dark things. And Nidal aligns under him. And they work with the Chelish, kind of in a weird alliance. The Chelish get Malthun and Isigur under them, and Andoran at the time they wanted it under them as well. So they began by trying to bring that under them. However, one of the at the time dock workers decides we've had enough. We've had enough being under the lords and princes and the pettiness, and so they have the revolution in Andoran that turns it into a republic. And they become one of the only republics that is anti-slavery, they become an agrarian society. And that's what Andoran is. And so, to give you that. Nermathus is a breakaway area with a wooded area and some of the different people that did not want to march under Malthun and under the Chelish Empire. So they broke away on their own. Variscia, been around a long time. It was what was Thassalon, and it grew up to be the land of legends. And the Chelish went out and they colonized some portions of it. Corvosa and some of the other cities are Chelish colonies. And the Chelish are very racist. They are racist against the Varicians and the Shonti. And they believe, they're expansionistic, and they come in and they try to take over that area. However, the Varicians and the Shonti basically push back little by little. But it becomes a colony state almost. And this is before Abrogail takes over. But after she takes over, some of the infernal influence moves up into that area. And it becomes a place of some wonderful adventure paths, like Rise of the Ruin Lords and Shattered Star and Second Darkness and a lot of other paths. So it's a rich region and a great little city there that they called Sandpoint, that everything is based out of in the beginnings. So Rahadum in the Southern Empire in Giran, Rahadum was a nation that used to have gods in it, but they saw a time when Norgorber, who is the god of lies, deceits, poison, and sadism, depending on which aspect you worship of him, the Norgorberites and the Sarenraites, as well as the Abadarans, go to war against each other. And they cause such chaos in Rahadum and death that the rise of the Empire of Man comes. And they basically reject gods. They believe in them, but they reject them. And they go on a holy crusade to purge religion from their country. So they're an interesting country. Thuvia, again, tribal. It was the Tikrichian League. What's so great about it? They have the sun orchid, and the sun orchid supposedly could make an elixir that would gain you eternal life or elongated life. And so people would buy this elixir, and there's this alchemist there that knows the secret of how to mix it, but he only sells so much a year to the highest bidder. So it becomes a real monopoly. It's an interesting country. Osirian, basically under the Ruby Prince, begins its rise back to prominence. Much more a good nation and trying to do things right. The old gods like Thoth and Ra and the others become a little more buried. They're still there, but their influence isn't as much as back in the time of the God Kings. So Abadar and some of the other gods of Garen take over there and really become Pharasma, the lady of birth and death and prophecy, take their prominence in this country. Katapesh. Love, freaking love Katapesh. Katapesh is the trade center hub. It is the Istanbul or Constantinople of this country. It's the best way I can put it. Anything you want, any delight you want, anything you want to buy, you can find in Katapesh. You want slaves, find it there. You want no slaves, find it there. You want different things. Now, the neat build about this is Katapesh was around before, but it lost its prominence as the sands and time eroded it. And what came supposedly were the different lords of that area. And I love them, and I love their whole mystery behind them. And don't let me slaughter this, because I'm going to go back through and I'm going to give you a little bit of background. So I'm going to talk about one of my favorite nations, Katapesh. The Pact Masters of Katapesh came with armies and recolonized the area. Interesting, huh? Don't look human, huh? A lot of speculation. Speculation are there a bunch of witch weirds that came in. And these witch weirds are from another planet. And they believe in fair trade. And that's why Katapesh is about fair trade. If you can murder a person in the streets, you'll get a penalty, but nothing like if you break a trade pact. There, it could be life imprisonment or hanging. So it's all about the trade. It's an interesting area. Of course, there's Nex and Geb in the Mana Waste. Now, the Mana Waste has Alkenstar, and Alkenstar has the firearm factory. They discovered black powder. They have flintlocks. You can go as far ahead with them as you want. You can go all the way up to modern age pistols if you want. A lot of the suggestion, though, my suggestion, leave it at the flintlocks for this time period, because that's really where it is. But Alkenstar, because of the magic storms that happen in the Mana Waste and the mutations and the dead zones for magic and other things that happen, this area is a mess. And so they had to go to technology to survive, basically. Geb, surprisingly, even though it's an undead nation south of Nex, has very rich and fertile farmland. And they provide the food using zombies and skeletons to grow the food for the world area. Interesting, huh? Mostly undead, though. And then you've got Sargava. Sargava was one of the colonies, the lost colonies under the Mwangi expanse of the Taldorans and the Chelish. Well, actually, the Chelish. Sorry, not the Taldorans. The Chelish. The Chelish founded it, but this was before Abigail. And they do not like the Thrune Empire. In fact, they broke away because they picked the other opponent of hers, who she killed. And so now she wants that colony back and under, the Chelish rule of Asmodeanism. And so right now, they align themselves with the Shackle Islands and the Storm King to basically protect them. And they pay hush money and hush resources to the Shackles, to the point of almost going broke, to protect them from the Chelish armadas. And they have. That and the Eye of Bendigo sank several Chelish fleets. And there's a real uneasy tension. And so the Chelish want to take over the Shackles and put the pirates under them so that then they can make their way to Sargava. Then you got Mediogalti Island. Now, this is an interesting one because there's a god called Akashek. Akashek is a red mantis, and that's where the Red Mantis Society is. And Akashek is the assassin of the gods, and he will do the dirty work of any of the gods to help them out. And he's very lawful evil and believes in that, but he is vicious. And so you've got the Red Mantis cult that is there. They're a cult, a religious cult of assassins, and they're on Mediogalti Island. And there's also a city on Mediogalti, Ilsmagordi, which is a pirate city. So the pirates and the Red Mantis exist side by side. So this gives you a little bit into the different areas. Then you got the Sodden lands, which I talk about, or Lurgan. I hope this gives you a little bit of background into things. Now, there are several human races that are on this world. Okay, you have the Arcadians, which are across the ocean. They are a very civilized Native American peoples. Several tribes of what would have been, I use the term Native American because it's the closest thing that you can term them to. They have some colonization from Andoran and from Cheliax. There are 3 cities over there, but they're fledgling cities, and they only exist at the patience of the Arcadians. And the Arcadians at any time could destroy them. Then there's also an Ulfin city a little bit higher up, and there's a different level of respect there. So that's Arcadia. So you've got the Arcadians. You have the Gerundi and the Polyglots, which are basically the African tribes of Gerund. There are other tribes that are more southmost. Believe me, there's hobgoblins, there's Aasimar, celestials, and other creatures, and even the fallen serpent empires are all there. They haven't fleshed out all of Gerund. They've given you the top half of Gerund. There's a whole section with Hallmog on down that is missing. They give a little bit in Distant Shores on Hallmog. It's an Amazonian type of empire. It's an interesting empire. So there's a lot still undone. Then you've got Tien Xia, where you've got the Kitsune, you've got the Tengu, you've got, which are the Birdmen, you've got the Samsarans, and you've got the Weiyang, and also the different Tien tribes. There's probably 8 of them that are covering the area of Tien. And they cover the different ones, like the Korean Empire, all the different ones. This is this world's version of it. Then Avestan. Avestan, you've got, of course, the Kelids is humans. You've got the Ulfin in the north, and the Norm Kings, and in the Orisian. And you also have the Jadwiga, which are the descendants of Baba Yaga, that are up in that area. In Brevoy, you've got the Iobarian barbarians that are there, which some say are Ulfin, some say are a mix of different tribal things that grew up in that area. You've got the Varisians, which have spread out all the way from Varisia all the way over to Brevoy in their background. So there's a lot of tribes that are spread out through there. You have the Shonti barbarians, a lot smaller because the Quas aren't as big and as powerful as they were before the Chelish. You have the Chelish Taldorans. They're their own race of Aslanti that have kind of broken off, so they call them separately. Then you have the Taldorans, which are a part of Taldor and some of Andoran. Andoran's a mix of different races. You've got Absalom, the city of many different mixtures that's there. And then you have the Osirian Gerundi, and you have the Kelishites, which come from the Padishah Empire. Then Jalmaray, which is the island that's off of Katapesh, which I forgot to mention. That is a colony of the Vudrani. They came over to set up a different trading thing because they're south of the Padishah Empire, and they're part of that region, but they're their own race of people. They're their own races, like the Indian races or the Persian or the Kashmir area races are there. And then you've got a mix. You've got different dwarves. You've got ice dwarves and ice elves. You've got the desert dwarves and elves, as well as the jungle elves. You also have a whole other type of elf called the Pamet. The Pamet serve the pharaohs and the Osirian, and very lawful oriented and very traditional oriented in respecting the dead, and they hate undeath. So you've got the Pamet tribes. So there's a lot of different races that are on this world. And it's very rich, and there's so much. Like again, I've spent 49 minutes going into an hour. I could spend 4 hours going over these areas, but I do this a little bit to give you a snapshot of the different peoples that are there. Each one has their own rich traditions. I would say the Inner Sea Races takes you through. Now, a lot of people knock this book because of what it didn't have. What it did have was on the major human races and stuff. It talks about the stuff that needed to be talked about. And then there's a book on the Inner Sea Gods. There's also a second supplement called the Inner Sea Religions. God, I'm botching which book, but there's another whole book on the minor gods that are in there. And there's many gods that haven't even been touched yet. We haven't even gone to Casmaron or Arcadia. So there's so many gods and goddesses that haven't even been touched. But this whole realm is so rich with different things. And then you've got the solar system. And that's eventually what Star Finder will be based off of. It's all these other things in the star system. So you got the Kassath. You got oh my gosh, there's so many different races I could go through of star races. So there's a lot you can do. And then there's Numeria. Numeria is the fallen sky debris. So there was a giant spaceship that came crashing down back in the age of back in the age of Destiny and before. So it altered the whole tribal area, and the Technic League grew up. And the Technic League was formed by some of the lost star people that were trying to get back out into the stars, but then got taken over from the inside by the races or the different factions in Golarion, and has now become its own little messy little mess. So keep in mind, there's a lot of rich things in this world. We haven't even touched the Golgon Empire, the Lost Cyclopean Empire, and the influences. Like I say, I could spend days talking about the rich history of this world. Get to know it. That's what I'm saying to a lot of GMs here is, yes, okay, people's biggest knock is the cost of running Pathfinder. I say, okay, I get you, but take it off in little nibbles at a time. Pick an area of the world you want to start your party out on. Get the books and the paths for that region. Then move over, then move over, then move over, then move over. Add little bites at a time, and you will not be disappointed. There's a lot of stuff you can get on the Pathfinder PRD that explains a lot of it, that explains the different races and worlds and histories. You can get a lot of this stuff on Pathfinder or Golarion Wiki. So keep in mind, you don't necessarily have to invest all the time in these books, but the PDFs alone, one guy made that suggestion the other day on Twitter, is he said, you know what, I didn't want to spend the money for all the hardcovers. I bought a certain number of hardcovers, and the rest I got in PDF, because the PDFs are very inexpensive. And keep that in mind. You can get the PDFs if you don't mind reading them on an iPad or something else. They're well worth the spend. They really are. And the material there is just so immensely rich. And it's because of the people who are a part of Paizo. They spend a lot of blood, sweat, and tears making great material that really, sometimes their work is very thankless. And I really appreciate it. I mean, I know some of you guys may not be a fan of it, and you may not love it. But you know what, folks? Create your own. Okay, I'm going to tell you, to do the history that they've done in creating your own, with the exception of Wolfgang Bauer and Kobold Press, Purple Duck, and a few others who have done a tremendously great job of doing that, most of us can't even touch them, all right? 1 out of every 10 GMs can create their own world with some sort of history and significance, even close to what Pathfinder does with Paizo. So just keep that in mind. It takes a lot of effort to create your own. And unless you have those hours available to you that you want to take from your family and the loved ones and the blood, sweat, and tears you want to spend on it, and unless they're supporting you in this, you're going to have a very unhappy home if you spend the amount of time and hours Paizo spends. These guys fortunately get to do it as their job, and their family members are amenable to it. So, all right, guys, hope this dive helps, and I hope it makes your day a better day. Thanks.